Okay, so we're going to talk about strategic funding blueprint, piecing together a funding plan. So strategic funding for organizational success. The reason you have to work on strategic funding is because you're probably not going to find one grant to cover your whole project or any type of funding source. So to work on strategic funding, you want to understand your organization, identify what needs to be funded, explore diverse funding sources, decide what you're going to fund and how, and then take all that information and make an informed decision. And you can see here just some of the things in the image. You've got grants, you've got recurring gifts, which is like a membership, event revenue, foundation grants, peer-to-peer fundraising, lots of different ways, and we'll go over some of that today. So identify your funding needs. There's basically 3 different types of funding needs for most projects or organizations. You've got project-based funding. So you would work on a description of the project, say it's to make your building more accessible. You'd want a budget of the project, which would include material, labor, anything that goes into it, and a timeline, when you believe you can start it and how long you think it will take to complete it. Those are all pieces you'll need to know before you decide how to fund a project. Operational funding, this is when an organization just needs funds to keep going. General operating expenses, staff and administration costs are usually included in operational funding. Business expansion, you are at a point where everything's great and you're ready to scale. So you might need additional equipment and space or more staffing needs. So in an ideal world, your organization supports itself through what it does, whether it's sales, admission to museums, memberships for people to have ongoing gifts. But unfortunately, that's not where most of us live. Okay. So before we get into breaking down, we're going to talk about briefly the types of funding sources, what you can look at when you're breaking down what funds you need. So bootstrapping is what we call self-funding. It can be personal savings, which a good rule of thumb is never spend more than 80% of your savings. Keep 20 in there, no matter what comes up, you're going to need it for something. Friends and family, you might be able to go into business with someone in your family or friend and be able to fund that way with them paying part of the bills. Some people use personal home equity. Of course, there's dangers to that. If something happens to the business, you have no way to bring in income, then you still have to pay off your equity loan. Then you've got grants as a funding source. There's government grants, which are usually higher dollar, but harder to get and harder to manage. Private foundation grants, those can range from small to large, from very little oversight to very complicated oversight. And then you've got corporate grants, just for example, from Walmart. Then you've got loans. You've got your traditional bank loan where you go into your bank and fill out loan paper. You've got small business administration loans. These are funded through or supported through the government. And they might have special qualities that make it more attractive for a small business. And then you've got alternative lending sources, online lenders, crowdsourcing, and investor-backed loans. So that is just a few funding sources, and you can make sure to explore those different channels. Okay, so now you know a little bit about where funding can come from. So take whatever your project, your business, your organization is, and break it down into smaller pieces. When you break it into smaller pieces, you can increase your chances of securing funding from a variety of sources and of completing your project on budget and on time. So we're going to go through an example. This example is creating a park. However, you can apply this example to pretty much any organization or project. It's just to give you an idea of how you take that large piece and break it down. So the first part of this park I'm developing is planning and design. You might need to conduct community needs assessment to see what is needed in the park. Is it trails? Is it equipment for children to play on? Is it handicap accessible? Things like that, to see what what's really needed in your community. You would develop a park master plan and obtain necessary permits and approvals through municipalities or whatever you need to get. So that might be your first phase, planning and design. Your second phase, once you've designed and done all the planning, could be site preparation. So what goes into site preparation? Clear the land, get ready for construction, install utilities if needed, make sure your park is draining correctly, make pathways, walkways. So that might be your phase 2 and how to break that down into smaller pieces. Phase 3 could be the construction phase where you actually start building your park. So part of that may be constructing your park's features and amenities, such as a playground, sports field, picnic areas, restrooms. And then in addition to installation, you might need to install landscape and better irrigation. Phase 4, and remember, this is just an example of the park I'm creating. Once you have built everything, phase 4 could be maintenance and operation. You'll need to maintain the park. Is that adding mulch periodically? Is that mowing? Is it replanting every year? And then you might need to hire staff to maintain and operate your park. So once you've looked at your big pieces and broken it down into some smaller chunks, you can take those smaller chunks and maybe break it down even further. For example, the site preparation phase, you might be able to break it down into land clearing, utility, drainage, pathway construction. The reason I recommend taking the big picture and breaking it down into small chunks is because it is easier to find grants that might be, say, for pathway and walkway construction, trail construction, utility installation. It's easier to find those grants than it is to find one large grant that funds your park. So we like to break everything down into smaller parts. So some tips for dialing in on those small pieces of your project. You, of course, want to identify the essential components. What are the must-have features and amenities for your park? Once you've identified the essential components, you can focus on writing grant proposals for those specific components. So this is like anything else you would do in your life. You want to plan your park. Maybe it's pretty extensive, but then you need to think, what do I need to have in this park to have a working park, to have a park that is useful for my community? Maybe there are some things that would go in a phase down the road I want to add, but I need to identify what is really, really needed. So think about that pretty carefully. Group similar activities together. For example, you could put all of your land clearing activities together and maybe make a single grant proposal for land clearing activities. This might make it easier for grant makers to understand your project and determine if you're a good fit for their funding priorities. Be realistic about your budget and your timeline. Don't break it down into too many small pieces that it becomes difficult to manage or takes too long to complete. So be reasonable when you're breaking it down. So we're going to look at a few of the different types of funding. I will add this. So when I say take your big project, your organization, and break it down into those small parts, decide what are the important parts to fund first. That's when you would also take those parts, look at the different funding channels and say, okay, this first part, site preparation, the town has a grant and they're going to help me with that. So I don't need to fund that. I already have that taken care of. Or you can say, I have an uncle who's a landscaper. He's already told me he will do this as a favor. He will do my landscaping. So I've broken that part out of my full budget, and that would be your in-kind donations. So that is before you decide what funding is needed, break it down and see what can be handled without finding additional funding sources. So bootstrapping. We've all had to bootstrap for one thing or another. This is your personal savings, which, as I said, make sure you keep at least 20% of what you started with in there. The good and the bad, this is your money. It may not come back, but it's your money and you don't have to answer to anyone else for it. Engage family and friends. Your uncle might be a great person to help with your landscaping, but how reliable is he? If he gets a paying job, he's not going to finish your job. So pros, it's a lot cheaper. Cons, we just don't trust our uncle that much. Tap into personal home equity. That is certainly, for many people, a large sum of money, especially the way equity has been, or housing prices have been going up. You could probably access a good bit of home equity. But again, if your business, your project doesn't get off the ground, doesn't get completed, you still have to pay that money back, or you could lose your house. But those are some types of bootstrapping we've all had to do to get through various things. But there's good and bad about it all. More fun with bootstrapping. It can be a little fun. What used to be called couch cushions, I'm not sure that's as applicable now, or save your change. People that still use cash, some don't, some are completely paperless. But if you still use cash and you're out for a day, you spend a $20 bill somewhere, you have your change in your pocket, don't go to the next place and try to see what change you can spend, just keep the change, put it in a jar. You'd be a little surprised at the end of the year what you may be able to fund out of that jar of change. Sell to family, friends, and groups. By this, I mean selling whatever your product is. Groups could be a church group, a school group, 4-H, Girl Scout, anything you're already involved in. Say you have a agritourism farm, make a package that you could sell to the Girl Scout group, and they're usually willing to pay, $5 a person to do some interesting experience. And that means they don't have to plan a day of activities. So groups like that. Pre-sale. If you have something going on in your organization that you can pre-sell, maybe you're not quite off the ground yet, but you're working on a fundraiser, you're working on annual memberships, say, put out the social media to say, we are pre-selling memberships. You'll be a founding person in this Friends of the Museum or whatever your organization is. So you can pre-sell some things, not everything. Yard sales and online selling. I have a fun story from one of my very favorite funding speakers. His name is Mike Collins. His company is The Perfect Workday. If you've not engaged with him at all, check out his website. He was working with a couple who was going to start a small business. He works mostly with businesses. And they said, we just don't have any more money. We don't know where our money's going to come from. And Mike said, well, do you have a garage? They're like, yeah, we have a garage. And he's like, do you park your cars in it? Like, oh, no, we don't park our cars in it. It's way too full of junk. And that's when it hit them. It was way too full of stuff they don't use. So they had a yard sale and made certainly not a lot of money, but some money to get them through the hump that they were trying to get through. So there's always things you can sell with Facebook Marketplace, yard sales, and make some money. Fundraisers, depending on your type of organization, you can have events that fundraise. You can also do online fundraisers. Memberships, like I was saying before, I am a member of many things in my county. There's a historic site. I'm an annual member of that. I'm an annual member of the museum. Just if I get a mailing, or if I even see it on Facebook, says become a member, $50 a year, I'm like, great. That's I don't have time to volunteer with them, but I can give them $50 a year. And lots of people are willing to just kick in a membership for something, especially if they get something from it. But even if they don't, people like to sponsor memberships. Crowdfunding, that is just what it sounds like. It's like GoFundMe, but for an organization. These are for organizations. Whenever you see a link in the presentation, you will also be able to see it in the card deck. Card decks will be right beside the videos in the Knowledge Center. There's also crowdfunding sites for businesses. You can cut back on subscriptions. I'm sure you've heard the ad on your favorite podcast where it says you probably are spending more than you know of in subscriptions. And that's kind of true. It was true for me. You can also find things like, if you're a member of Walmart Plus, read through the benefits of that, and you'll see you can get, there's some subscriptions you can get in there for free for being a member of Walmart Plus, like I think maybe Hulu comes with that. But there are many subscriptions like that you may be able to replace, or ask your family, maybe nobody's using them. You can always put them on hold if it's something you want to cut back on. And these are all small ways to raise money, but it's something that can be done easier and can add up. Okay, so grants. It's everyone's favorite type of money. It just so happens most are competitive and aren't quite as easy to get as we would like. So, grants, where to start? Now, this is where you take the small pieces of your project and try to fit them into grants, eligibility, what the grant is made for. If you've looked at grants or applied for grants, you know that most are really specific. They are for only nonprofits, or they're for only people that want to fund native flowers. So that's why the small pieces are important. To research grants, you'll want to find your grant. Now here, this will be a link to our Knowledge Center. We have created, Uplift has created a Knowledge Center that has more than 500 opportunities. Most are grants, some are loans, some are in kind, and you can go through and search that database if you would like. You can identify the primary objective of the grants you're finding. and pay specific attention to the intent of the grant, whether it's for a project, capacity building, capital expenses. You'll need to try to fit what you're working on into each of these. Recognizing the grant organization's missions and values. This will be right there, usually right there on the page where they're announcing the grant. Understand the principles of the organization, align your application with the funder's mission. What does that mean? Once you've identified your piece of grant that you, or excuse me, your piece of your project that you want to fund, you'll be looking for grants related to that. If you find one that fits your project, when you're writing the grant, make sure you have read over the mission of your grantor and you're using those words that they use. You're representing their values. You're putting your grant proposal into their mold. So as you're looking through these grants, you'll want to check the guidelines. It's very rare you have a grant that's eligible for everybody, for every project, for just anything. So you'll want to check, what are the submission guidelines? Do I have time to get done what I need to get done? What's the eligibility? Am I a 501c3? Am I a private business? Am I a nonprofit, maybe not a 501c3? Am I a town? The application format, you'll want to make sure to follow that. The project scope, how big can this grant fund and how small can it fund? Budget requirements, some require that you have to have a budget to turn in and some don't. But they also may require a certain amount of time that you can spend it in. If you know your project's a 2-year project and it says it must be spent by the end of this year or returned, then that might not be a good grant for you. Any supporting documents, some need your founding documents, some need financials, some don't. Submission method. Usually they're online submissions now. There are some that still want you to print, write, turn it in. So make sure you know what the submission method is and the contact information. So here we have a link for Grant Application Guidelines, a comprehensive guide. So that's something you might want to explore for more information. So we're going to go over these kind of quickly. I know you can read. I don't want to waste your time on much of it, but this is as you are looking at grants to understand the criteria. Who can apply? Like we were saying, maybe it's an organization that has to be 50 or under. Some are 10 or under, or maybe it's 100 or more. 501c3, for-profit, your tax classification, operational focus, geographic location. That's really what I usually look at first, because there are grants that are only for Mecklenburg County, only for tier 1 counties, only for the western part of the state. And there's some that might just be for Arkansas. And just skip right over those. Special considerations or exclusions in the guidelines. Make sure you're looking closely at funding restrictions. If there's a matching fund, that usually comes along with like your state and federal grants. You might have to put up money, show that you have resources to get more resources. Reporting, that could be very complex. It could be very simple, but they'll let you know up front. This is just the scope. We talked about project, operational, and capital grants. Just make sure you know what that grant's scope and details are before you apply. You do not want to waste your time if it's something you just don't have a chance at getting or won't fund what you need. Funding amounts, grant duration, matching fund requirements. These are all things that could eliminate you right out of the gate, or it could be, yep, this falls exactly into what I need. So key components of the application procedure. If you have never applied for a grant before, usually it's best to start out with smaller grants and then move your way up as you've learned how to do the application, win a few small grants. But you want to make sure you have all the documents you need. Smaller grants don't usually require all this. Larger grants will require a lot of this information. Budgets, plans, letters of support, organizational information. Make sure you meet the deadlines. It might not be one deadline. It might be a lot of deadlines that you have to know when to turn in the grant. That's great, but you might also need to know when they need additional information. Do not miss the deadline. This is something you might have seen before. Again, there'll be a link down here. Tips for stronger grant proposals. These are the 5 R's, very similar to the 5 C's of credit. Readiness, research, relationships. I know writing doesn't start with an R, and reporting. So business loans. We'll go through this pretty quickly. This is your how to evaluate creditworthiness. If you're down to where you have to get funding pretty quickly, then a loan may be the only way to go. Grants are much longer process. You might have a deadline of June 15th, but then they're not going to award the grant until a few months later, and then they're not going to fund it for a few months after that. It is a very long process for many grants. It's not where you get quick funds, but loans may very well be. And sometimes that is your only way to get what you need. This is information about how to check your business credit report, which is different than your personal. Of course, you want to make sure your personal credit is where it needs to be. Different loans have different requirements, but this is how you check your business credit. These are the different type of loans. You're likely familiar with most of this. Business terms or installment loans, lines of credit, usually secured against some sort of personal property, special purpose loans. These are the ones that are a little more unique to you and may be of really good value to you if you fit into the category of the special purpose loan. You'll see here, there's disaster loans if you were affected by a hurricane. Military and veterans, they have special loan programs. Manufacturing, agriculture, there are very specific loan programs. So here's some non-traditional lending options. They're all really neat, and you'll have the links in the card deck. One in particular I've used is Kiva, this one in the middle. When my child was young, we gave her a Kiva site and $25, and she put her money into that project. And then once the project was fully funded, there was a period where your $25 was returned to you because it was a loan. Now, if the project fails, you don't get your money back. But when she'd get her money back, she'd put it into a different one. And if you go to the Kiva site, you'll see it's just a micro lending site where the participants in Kiva are the ones who fund the project. So it's pretty cool. But these others are very similar. Government lending, these are secure. They might not have as many hoops. They might have better rates. They might have special types of forgivenesses, grace periods. So first, this is Small Business Association. You can click there to look more about it. The Small Business Administration will have offices in each community college. So you can go to, they usually call it a small business center. They'll help you with everything. They'll help you with your business plan. They'll help you look at the different loans that might apply to you. They don't fund the loans, but they connect you with those who do. These are some of the more specialized lending resources, the Minority Business Development Agency. They not only offer loans, but they offer technical assistance, which is really great. They can help you through a lot of your issues. Rural Development, they also have grants, but they also have loan guarantees for your small farms in rural areas, which is what we all are. Department of the Treasury, you'll have links to look through all those. So this is just for you to have, to look at, to think about. This is brainstorming what you need in each type of category, or if you have each. If it's project based, make sure you know what type it is, like we discussed earlier. Determine what you must have and what can wait. So you'll see if it's urgent, you probably need to handle with what you have on hand. It might have to be a loan against your home. It might have to be your savings. If it's urgent, but you don't have the money right then, you probably will need to find a loan. And it can be through relatives, but you probably will need to get a loan. If it is not urgent, like I said, grants take a long time, then it can be funded by grants. That's really why planning ahead is so crucial, that you don't start a project, get in the middle, realize you don't have enough funds for it, and then you're stuck having to go through a loan or some other process, because you will not be able to get a grant that will urgently get you out of some sort of situation you might have not anticipated. So we can talk about what is most urgent, what type of funding. This is our contact information. This is my email address. You can access from the link on the deck. This is our Uplift site. When you email me, I will email back, and I have a scheduler that you'll be able to select a time to talk if you want to have a face-to-face through Zoom meeting to discuss your goals, your needs, or anything like that. Then we can do that through that link.